In the cold light of an early spring morning in 1843, Miss Rosalie Bennet stood before the iron gates of Thornfield Manor, with nothing but a worn leather case and a letter of commission clutched in her gloved hand. The stone mansion rose before her like a sleeping giant, its grey towers disappearing into the mist that clung to the Yorkshire moors. At 23, she had painted many portraits. Wealthy merchants who wanted their faces immortalized, society ladies who demanded flattering lies upon canvas, but never had she been summoned to paint a man whose reputation preceded him like a funeral march. Lord Adrian Hargrove, the Earl of Thornfield. They said he never smiled. They said his eyes held winter even in summer. They said he had dismissed 7 portrait painters in 3 years, finding each one insufficient to capture whatever truth he sought in his own reflection. The gates swung open with a groan that seemed to echo across the empty moorland. A stern-faced butler appeared, his silver hair gleaming damp from the morning fog. "Miss Bennet," he intoned without warmth, "His lordship awaits you in the West Gallery. Your materials have been prepared according to your specifications." Rosalie followed him through corridors that seemed to swallow light rather than reflect it. The walls were lined with portraits of stern ancestors, their painted eyes following her progress with silent judgment. Candles flickered in iron sconces, casting shadows that danced like restless spirits. Finally, they reached a vast chamber where morning light poured through tall windows overlooking the wild garden below. And there he stood. Lord Adrian Hargrove turned from the window at her entrance, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed entirely in black, save for the white of his shirt collar. His face could have been carved from marble. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, and eyes the color of storm clouds before rain. He studied her with an intensity that made her fingers tighten on her case handle. "Miss Bennet," his voice was low and controlled. "You come highly recommended, though I confess I have little faith in recommendations anymore. I have very specific requirements for this portrait." Rosalie curtsied, maintaining perfect composure despite the weight of his scrutiny. "My lord, I paint what I see, nothing more, nothing less. If that does not satisfy your requirements, perhaps I should depart before wasting your time or mine." A flicker of something, surprise perhaps, crossed his stern features. The last painter wept after 2 days. The one before him lasted a week before declaring me impossible to capture, and you believe you can succeed where they failed. "I believe," Rosalie replied evenly, "that perhaps they were trying to paint what you wish to be, rather than what you are. There is a difference." His eyes narrowed. "And what do you imagine I am, Miss Bennet?" She set down her case and removed her gloves with deliberate care, that small ritual helping to steady her nerves. "I do not imagine anything, my lord. That is why I paint, to discover the truth beneath the surface." Something shifted in his expression. Not softening exactly, but a crack in the armor of his formality. "Very well, we shall see if your confidence is justified or merely youthful arrogance. You may begin preparations. I shall sit for the first session at 10 o'clock precisely." As he strode from the gallery, his footsteps echoing against stone floors, Rosalie released a breath she had not realized she was holding. The housekeeper appeared, a woman called Mrs. Fielding, whose weathered face suggested she had seen many seasons at Thornfield. "You stood up to him," the woman said quietly, arranging paint supplies on a nearby table. "Most don't. Most try to please him and fail because what he wants cannot be pleased." "What does he want?" Rosie asked, unpacking her brushes with practiced efficiency. Mrs. Fielding paused, considering her words carefully. "To see himself truly, I think, but fearing what that truth might reveal." At precisely 10 o'clock, Lord Hargrove returned. He had changed into a dark blue coat that somehow made his eyes appear even more stormy. Without a word, he settled into the chair Rosalie had positioned near the window where natural light would illuminate his features without harsh shadows. She studied him silently, her artist's eye noting every detail, the proud set of his shoulders that spoke of burden rather than arrogance, the tension in his jaw that never quite released, the way his hands, strong and scarred from some past trauma, rested against the chair arms with forced stillness. "You may speak if you wish," he said, after several minutes of silence. "The quiet unnerves most people." "I find silence useful," Rosalie replied, beginning to sketch preliminary lines on her prepared canvas. "Words often hide more than they reveal. Silence shows us what we try to conceal." His gaze sharpened. "A philosopher as well as a painter." "Simply an observer, my lord." She mixed colors on her palette, creating the exact shade of his eyes, that peculiar gray with hints of blue like distant mountains before a storm. "Tell me, why commission a portrait now after dismissing so many artists?" He was quiet, so long she thought he would not answer. Then his voice lower. "There are moments when one must confront what has been avoided. My father's portrait hangs in the great hall. My grandfather's beside it. An empty space waits for mine. The weight of legacy demands its accounting. And what will your portrait show to those who view it 100 years hence?" "That I existed," he said simply. "Nothing more." Rosalie's brush paused mid-stroke. "You do not wish to be remembered." "I wish to be honest." His eyes met hers directly. "Most portraits are lies. Painted flattery designed to make the viewer comfortable with the subject's importance. I want the truth, Miss Bennet. However uncomfortable it may be." She resumed painting, her strokes careful and deliberate. "The truth has a cost, my lord. Are you prepared to see yourself without the armor you wear so carefully?" His laugh held no humor. "Perhaps that is precisely what I need." The days fell into a pattern. Morning light brought Lord Hargrove to the West Gallery, where he would sit in rigid stillness while Rosalie worked. At first, their sessions were silent, except for the whisper of brush against canvas and the occasional creak of old wood settling. But gradually, words began to fill the spaces between brush strokes. "Tell me of your training," he asked, on the fourth day. Rosalie mixed a deeper shadow, capturing the hollows beneath his cheekbones. "My father was a portrait painter of modest reputation. He taught me everything, though society deemed it improper for women to pursue such work professionally. When he died 3 years ago, I had little choice but to continue his craft or starve." "You paint with anger, then, against circumstance?" She looked up from her canvas, meeting his gaze. "I paint with purpose, my lord. There is a difference. Anger burns out quickly. Purpose sustains even when the fire grows cold." Something in his expression shifted, a brief vulnerability quickly masked. "You speak from experience, as do we all who survive rather than merely exist." Her brush moved across the canvas with confident strokes. "You bear a scar above your left eyebrow. How did you acquire it?" He raised one hand, instinctively, to touch the faint white line. "A childhood accident. My younger brother and I were playing at swords with tree branches. His aim proved better than mine." His tone had lightened almost imperceptibly, but Rosalie caught the change. "You loved him." The tension returned to his shoulders immediately. "Past tense, Miss Bennet. I hear grief in your voice, my lord. Grief speaks in past tense even when we wish it otherwise." Lord Hargrove stood abruptly, moving to the window where morning mist still clung to the moorland. "Thomas died 7 years ago. Fever took him in 3 days. He was 19. full of light and laughter that this house has not known since. Rosalie set down her brush carefully. "I am sorry for your loss." "Are you?" He did not turn from the window. "Or do you merely speak the expected words?" "Both can be true," she replied quietly. "I lost my mother when I was 12. The expected words become genuine when spoken by those who understand their weight." He turned then, studying her with new intensity. "You paint grief well, I suspect." "I paint what I see," she repeated her earlier words. "And grief leaves marks upon us all, visible or otherwise." "Then show me those marks," he said, returning to his chair. "Paint not what flatters, but what remains. If you can capture that, Miss Bennet, you will have succeeded where all others failed." As the days lengthened into weeks, something unexpected began to grow between painter and subject. It started small, a shared observation about the weather, a brief discussion of books they had both read. The way Lord Hargrove's rigid posture would gradually relax as each session progressed. Rosalie found herself arriving earlier each morning, eager for those hours in the sun-filled gallery. The portrait was taking shape beautifully. Her finest work, she knew without false modesty. But something else was also taking shape, something she had not anticipated and knew she should not permit. She was beginning to see beneath the stern exterior to the man beneath, the one who left books he thought she might enjoy on the table beside her easel, the one whose eyes would soften almost imperceptibly when she spoke of her father, the one who she realized with growing alarm was becoming dangerously important to her peace of mind. On the morning of the third week, spring rain lashed against the tall windows, turning the moorland into a watercolor of grey and green. Lord Hargrove arrived later than usual, his hair damp, his expression darker than she had yet seen. "Forgive my tardiness," he said, without meeting her eyes. "Estate matters required attention." Rosalie noted the tension in every line of his body as he took his position. "The rain suits your mood today, my lord." His gaze snapped to hers. "You presume much." "I observe accurately," she corrected gently. "If you wish to postpone our session, I understand." "No." His voice was sharp. "Continue." She began to paint, but the atmosphere had shifted. Something troubled him deeply, and it showed in every rigid line of his posture. After 20 minutes of oppressive silence, Rosalie set down her brush. "I cannot paint a lie, my lord. Whatever burdens you today has altered your countenance. Either tell me what troubles you, or we must stop." He rose abruptly, pacing before the rain-streaked windows. "Today marks 7 years since Thomas's death. 7 years since laughter left these halls. 7 years since I failed him." Rosalie's heart contracted at the raw pain in his voice. "How did you fail him?" "I was here when the fever took him," he said, his back to her. "I sat beside his bed, held his hand, watched him burn with heat. I could not cool. The physician said nothing more could be done, but I should have done something, anything. Instead, I simply watched him die." She approached him slowly, stopping several feet away. "Grief often speaks in should have, my lord, but presence itself is not failure. You were there in his final moments. He was not alone. That is not nothing." He turned to face her, and she saw moisture gleaming in his storm-colored eyes. "You speak kindly, Miss Bennet, but kindness does not erase truth." "No," she agreed softly, "but perhaps it helps us bear it." For a long moment, they stood in the rain-dimmed gallery, the distance between them feeling both vast and impossibly small. Then Lord Hargrove reached out, his hand hovering near her face before dropping back to his side. "You see too clearly," he said, his voice rough. "It is dangerous." "For whom?" she asked, her heart beating faster. "For us both, I suspect," He stepped back, the careful distance re-establishing itself. "We should continue. I did not hire you to serve as my confessor." Rosalie returned to her easel, but something fundamental had shifted. The portrait staring back from the canvas captured more than mere features now. It showed the man beneath the title, the grief beneath the stern exterior, the humanity beneath the practiced control. And with every brushstroke, Rosalie felt herself falling deeper into territory from which there might be no safe return. The spring days grew longer and warmer as April surrendered to May. The wild garden below the West Gallery burst into unexpected color. Purple heather carpeted the moors. Birds returned to nest in the stone eaves of Thornfield Manor, and within the sun-filled gallery something bloomed that neither painter nor subject dared to name. Lord Hargrove no longer arrived precisely at 10. Sometimes he came early, standing silently beside Rosalie as she prepared her palette, watching the careful ritual of her preparations. Sometimes he brought tea himself, rather than summoning servants, an intimacy that did not escape Mrs. Fielding's knowing gaze. Their conversations deepened, moving beyond polite exchanges into territory that felt dangerous in its honesty. "Why did you never marry, my lord?" Rosalie asked one morning, adding highlights to capture the way sunlight touched his hair. He had grown accustomed to her direct questions. "What makes you assume I never married?" "You wear no ring," she replied, "and this house feels like a place where a woman's touch has never softened its edges." His smile was brief and bitter. "My father arranged a match when I was 25. Lady Caroline Ashworth. Beautiful, accomplished, everything a countess should be. But after Thomas died, I could not bear to fill this house with the pretense of happiness when grief still echoed in every corridor. I broke the engagement. She married a duke within 6 months. I believe she is quite content. And you? I am what you see before you, Miss Bennet. Content is not a word I would choose to describe my state." Rosalie paused, brush suspended above canvas. "What word would you choose?" He considered carefully, enduring. "I endure the passing days and the weight of obligations and the loneliness of legacy. That is no life at all," she said softly. "Merely existence. Is there truly a difference for men like me?" His eyes met hers with unexpected vulnerability. "We are born to duty, raised for responsibility, shaped by expectations that leave little room for the luxury of living." "There is always a choice," Rosalie countered. "Even when circumstances narrow our path, we choose how we walk it." Spoken like someone unburdened by centuries of ancestral obligation, or spoken by someone who has learned that the heaviest burdens are often those we place upon ourselves. She set down her brush. "My lord, if I may be bold, when have you ever been otherwise?" The ghost of a smile touched his lips. "This portrait," she gestured to the canvas, "it shows a man imprisoned not by duty, but by grief. You have mourned for 7 years. At what point does mourning become merely habit?" His expression hardened. "You overstep, Miss Bennet." "Yes," she acknowledged. "I do. But someone must. You hired me to paint truth. The truth is that you have built walls so high that even light struggles to reach you, and you call it duty when it is simply fear." "Fear?" His voice was dangerously quiet. "You presume to know what I fear." "I presume nothing," she replied, holding his stormy gaze. "But I have painted your eyes for 3 weeks now. I see what you hide from yourself. You fear that if you stop grieving, you will lose the last connection to your brother. You fear that happiness would be a betrayal of his memory, so you wrap yourself in sorrow and call it loyalty." The silence that followed felt like the held breath before a storm. Lord Hargrove stood, his expression unreadable. This session is concluded. He strode from the gallery, his footsteps echoing like thunder. The door closed with controlled force, and Rosalie found herself alone with the half-finished portrait that seemed to stare at her with accusation in its painted eyes. She had gone too far. Spoken truths better left unvoiced. By morning, she would likely receive notice of her dismissal, just like the 7 painters before her. But as she cleaned her brushes with trembling hands, Rosalie could not find it within herself to regret the words. Some truths demanded speaking, regardless of consequence. 3 days passed in tense silence. Lord Hargrove did not appear for their scheduled sessions. Servants moved through the corridors with unusual quiet, as if the house itself held its breath. Rosalie remained in her guest chamber, uncertain whether to depart or await formal dismissal. On the 4th morning, Mrs. Fielding appeared at her door before dawn. "His lordship requests your presence in the West Gallery," she said, her lined face unreadable. Rosalie dressed quickly, her heart beating with apprehension and something else. Hope, perhaps, or simply the desperate wish to see him again, even if only to receive her dismissal with dignity. The gallery was dim. Candles not yet lit, only the pale grey light of early morning filtering through the tall windows. Lord Hargrove stood before her easel, studying the unfinished portrait with an intensity that made Rosalie pause in the doorway. "I have been a coward," he said, without turning. "Thomas would be ashamed of the man I have become." Rosalie entered slowly, stopping several feet behind him. "Your brother loved you. Love does not shame. It hopes." He turned then, and she saw that his eyes were shadowed with sleeplessness, but somehow clearer than before, as if a fog had lifted. "You spoke truth. I was not ready to hear. But truth does not wait for readiness, does it?" "Rarely," she agreed softly. "Finish the portrait," he said. "Paint what you see. All of it. The grief, yes, but also whatever else you have found beneath it. I hired you to show me truth. I will not flinch from it now." Rosalie moved to her easel, relief flooding through her. She began preparing her palette, the familiar ritual steadying her emotions. As she worked, Lord Hargrove remained standing, watching her with an attention that felt different somehow. More open, less guarded. "I walked the moors for 3 days," he said quietly, "to the places Thomas and I played as boys. I have avoided those places for 7 years, but I went there now and remembered not only his death, but his life, his laughter, his terrible jokes, the way he could find joy in the smallest things, a bird's nest, a perfect stone, the first snowfall of winter." He paused, and Rosalie waited, giving him space for the words. "He would not want this prison I have built," Lord Hargrove continued. "He would want me to live, to find what happiness might still exist in this world, to honor his memory not through endless mourning but through embracing the life he lost." Rosalie's brush moved across the canvas, adding light where before there had been only shadow. "That sounds like wisdom hard-won. It sounds like words spoken by a woman brave enough to name what I could not see." His voice softened. "You are remarkable, Miss Bennet. Not merely as an artist, though your skill is exceptional, but as a person who sees beyond surfaces to truth beneath." She glanced up from her work, finding his gaze fixed upon her with an intensity that stole her breath. "My lord, you should take your seat. The light is perfect now." He moved to the chair, but did not settle immediately. Instead, he stood beside it, his hand resting on its carved back. "Before I sit, there is something I must say." Rosalie's heart hammered against her ribs. "Yes, my lord." "Adrian," he corrected. "If we are to traffic in truth, let us dispense with formality. My name is Adrian." The intimacy of his given name felt dangerous and thrilling in equal measure. "Adrian," she repeated softly, testing the shape of it. "Rosalie," he said, and her name on his lips felt like a caress. "These past weeks have been the first in 7 years where I have not simply endured, but actually felt alive. Your presence, your words, your clear-eyed vision of things I tried to hide. You have awakened something I thought had died with Thomas." She set down her brush with trembling fingers. "My lord, I mean Adrian, we should not speak of such things." "Why not?" "Because society deems it improper. Because you are the artist and I the patron. Because I am an earl and you are," he paused, choosing words carefully, "the most extraordinary woman I have ever encountered." "Because," Rosalie said, her voice barely above a whisper, "speaking such truths aloud gives them power, and I fear what that power might demand of us both." He crossed the space between them in 2 strides, stopping just before her, close enough that she could see the silver flecks in his grey eyes. "I have lived in fear for 7 years. Fear of happiness, fear of betraying Thomas's memory, fear of allowing myself to feel anything beyond duty and grief. But I am done with fear, Rosalie. Done with merely enduring when I might actually live." "Adrian," she breathed, torn between longing and propriety. "You are an earl. I am a painter's daughter with nothing to my name but talent and determination. This cannot be. Cannot, or should not." His hand raised slowly, giving her time to step away. When she did not move, his fingers gently touched her cheek. "Society dictates many things, but the heart knows its own truth." Rosalie closed her eyes, leaning into his touch despite every warning her rational mind screamed. "Your world and mine do not meet, my lord. What you feel now may simply be gratitude or the relief of finally acknowledging your grief. Do not mistake that for something more. Look at me," he commanded gently. When she opened her eyes, his face was inches from hers. "I have had weeks to examine what I feel. This is not gratitude. This is not grief-seeking comfort. This is recognition of a soul that sees mine clearly and does not turn away in disgust or pity, but simply accepts it as it is." Tears pricked at Rosalie's eyes. "You do not know what you're saying. When the portrait is finished, I will leave. You will return to your life, and this moment will fade like morning mist. Then let us not waste it," he murmured, and his lips touched hers with a gentleness that belied the intensity blazing in his eyes. The kiss was soft, questioning, a brush of warmth that sent fire racing through Rosalie's veins. For one perfect moment, she allowed herself to sink into it, to taste the possibility of something she had never dared to dream. Then reality crashed back with crushing weight. She pulled away gently but firmly, stepping back until the easel stood between them like a barrier. "Adrian, no. This is madness." His expression showed hurt, but he did not pursue her. "Then let me be mad. I have been sane and measured and controlled for 7 years. It has brought me nothing but emptiness. And rushing into something impossible will bring you only pain," she countered, wrapping her arms around herself as if to hold her breaking heart together. "You will regret this when clarity returns, and she swallowed hard. "I will have lost not only my commission but my peace of mind." He studied her for a long moment, his jaw tight with emotion. "What would it take for you to believe this is real?" "Time," she said softly. "Distance. Certainty that what you feel is not simply the result of grief loosening its hold, allowing other emotions to rush in and fill the void." His hands clenched at his sides. "And if time and distance only make the feeling stronger, what then, Rosalie?" "Then perhaps," she said, her voice breaking, "we will know it was real. But we cannot know that now. Please, my lord, Let me finish the portrait. Let us maintain what propriety remains, and when it is complete, I will leave. If you still feel this way after I am gone," she paused, gathering courage, "then write to me, and I will answer." It was a compromise that satisfied neither of them. But Adrian, recognizing the wisdom beneath her words even as his heart raged against them, nodded slowly. "Very well," he said, his voice carefully controlled once more. "We shall proceed as artist and patron. Nothing more, until the portrait is complete." He took his seat in the chair, and Rosalie resumed her position at the easel. But everything had changed. Every brushstroke felt weighted with longing. Every glance held unspoken words. Every moment stretched taut with the impossible tension of denied feeling. And the portrait itself began to transform. Where before Rosalie had captured grief and dignity, now something else emerged on the canvas. Hope, vulnerability, the face of a man awakening from long sleep, blinking against sudden light. It was, she knew, her masterpiece, but it would also be her torment, because every time she looked at it in years to come, she would remember the man who had fallen in love with her through the act of being truly seen, and the impossible choice she had made to walk away. The final week of painting passed in exquisite agony. Adrian kept his word, maintaining careful distance and formal address, but his eyes betrayed everything his words did not say, and Rosalie felt herself drowning in emotions she had tried so hard to deny. Mrs. Fielding watched them both with a mixture of sympathy and concern. "You're both being very noble and very foolish," she said one afternoon, finding Rosalie alone in the gallery. "Love does not appear often in life. To push it away in the name of propriety seems a particular kind of cruelty." "It is not cruelty but wisdom," Rosalie replied, though her voice lacked conviction. "He is grieving. I am temporary. This is not the foundation on which lasting happiness is built." And yet, the housekeeper observed, "You have already painted him back to life. That seems rather more significant than temporary." On the morning of the portrait's completion, Rosalie stood before the canvas as the sun rose over the moors. It was finished, every detail perfect, every truth captured. Adrian Hargrove, Earl of Thornfield, stared from the canvas with eyes that held winter and spring in equal measure. Grief acknowledged but no longer consuming. Strength earned through suffering. And beneath it all, a question, a hope for something more than mere endurance. Lord Hargrove entered the gallery precisely at 9, an hour earlier than their usual session. He had dressed with particular care in deep grey that matched his eyes. His expression was carefully neutral, but Rosalie knew him well enough now to see the tension in the set of his shoulders. "It is complete," she said simply, stepping aside so he could view the finished work. Adrian approached the canvas slowly, as one might approach a mirror that might reveal more than simple reflection. He stood motionless for so long that Rosalie's anxiety mounted to almost unbearable heights. Finally he spoke, his voice rough with emotion. "You have shown me who I am, who I was, and who I might yet become." "It is extraordinary, Rosalie." Tears burned behind her eyes. "I am glad it pleases you, my lord." He turned to face her then, abandoning all pretense of formality. "Nothing about this pleases me, Rosalie. The portrait is magnificent, yes, but it marks the end of our agreed time, and I find I am not prepared for that ending." "We made an arrangement," she said, though her voice trembled. "The portrait is complete. I must leave. That was always the agreement." "Hang the agreement," he said, with sudden vehemence. "Do you feel nothing? These weeks together, the conversations, the slow revelation of truth between us. Tell me you feel nothing, and I will let you go. But if you feel even a fraction of what consumes me, then stay." Rosalie's composure cracked, Of course I feel something. Do you think I am made of stone? Every moment in your presence has been both joy and torment. Every conversation has wound itself around my heart. But feeling is not enough, Adrian. The world does not care about our feelings. You are an earl with responsibilities, a legacy, expectations. I am nobody. Less than nobody in society's eyes. You are everything, he countered, closing the distance between them. You are intelligence and courage and clear-eyed truth. You are the woman who saw through my walls and painted not only my face but my soul. You are the only person in 7 years who has made me want to live rather than merely exist. And what would you have me do? She asked, tears now flowing freely. Stay here as what? Your mistress? A secret hidden in the servants' quarters? I will not dishonor myself or you in that way. Then stay as my wife, he said, and the words hung in the air like thunder. Rosalie stared at him in disbelief. You cannot mean that. I have never been more serious about anything in my life. His hands framed her face gently, his thumbs wiping away her tears. Marry me, Rosalie, not because of duty or obligation or convenience, but because you have awakened my heart and I do not wish to let you go. Society will crucify you, she whispered. An earl marrying a common painter, they will never accept it. Let them rage, he said fiercely. I have wasted 7 years caring what society thinks, living according to their rules and expectations. It brought me nothing but emptiness. If choosing you means scandal, then I welcome it. Let the gossips tear me apart. At least I will be torn apart while truly living. And if you regret it, if the passion fades and you're left with a wife who cannot navigate your world, who embarrasses you in society, who cannot be what a countess should be, then I will have you beside me, and that will be enough. His forehead touched hers. Rosalie, I am not asking for a perfect countess. I am asking for you, exactly as you are. Paint-stained fingers, brutal honesty, and all. She closed her eyes, torn between desperate hope and practical fear. This is madness. Perhaps, he agreed, but it is the first mad thing I have wanted in 7 years. Say yes, or if you cannot say yes, then at least do not say no. Give me time to prove this is real. Stay at Thornfield. Not as my painter, but as my guest. Let me court you properly. Let society be damned, and let us discover if what we feel is merely the intensity of these strange weeks, or something with deeper roots. Rosalie opened her eyes, finding his face inches from hers, hope and vulnerability warring in his storm-grey gaze. If I stay, she said slowly, it will be scandalous even as a guest. Then we shall be scandalous together, he replied, with Mrs. Fielding as chaperone and propriety observed in every public way. But stay, Rosalie, please, give us time to see if this mad thing might actually be real. For a long moment, she wavered on the knife's edge of decision. Reason screamed to leave, to protect herself, to avoid the inevitable pain when reality shattered these fragile dreams. But her heart, that traitorous organ, had already made its choice weeks ago. 1 month, she said finally. I will stay 1 month, as your guest, with absolute propriety, and at the end of that time, we will both reassess with clearer eyes. The relief that washed over his face made him look suddenly younger, the grief lines smoothing. 1 month, he agreed. Thank you. He kissed her then, and this time Rosalie did not pull away. The kiss was deeper than their first, full of promise and longing, and the desperate hope that sometimes, against all odds, impossible things might actually become real. When they finally separated, both breathing unsteadily, Adrian rested his forehead against hers once more. I will prove to you that this is not madness, he murmured, or if it is, It is the best kind of madness there is. The portrait watched them from its easel, capturing forever the moment when grief learned to hope again. And Rosalie realized that in painting his truth, she had somehow painted her own as well. Two souls who had thought themselves content with mere survival, discovering together that there might be something more, something worth the risk of ruin. The month that followed felt like walking a tightrope between propriety and passion. True to his word, Adrian treated Rosalie as an honored guest. Separate chambers, meals with Mrs. Fielding present, conversations in public rooms with doors open. But oh, the way he looked at her when he thought others were not watching. The way his hand would linger just a moment too long when helping her into the carriage. The way his voice would soften when he spoke her name. They walked the moors together, Mrs. Fielding trailing at a discreet distance. Adrian showed her the places from his childhood. The stream where he and Thomas had caught fish. The old oak tree where they had carved their initials, still visible after all these years. The hidden hollow where they had built imaginary kingdoms on summer afternoons. He was the diplomat, Adrian said, standing at the hollow's edge, staring across the purple heather. I was the warrior. He negotiated peace while I prepared for war. He always saw the best in people. I always saw their potential for betrayal. He paused, his voice growing rough. We balanced each other. When he died, I lost my counterweight. Rosalie touched his arm gently. You did not lose it, Adrian. It simply transformed. Thomas gave you the gift of seeing joy. That gift lives in your memory of him. You need not lose yourself to honor it. Instead, live fully enough for both of you. He turned to her, eyes bright with unshed tears. How did I survive 7 years without you? You did not survive, she replied honestly. You endured. There is a difference, but you are learning to survive now. I can see it in your eyes. Because of you, he said, taking her hand in his. Everything good returning to my life flows from you, Rosalie. She wanted to kiss him, wanted it with an intensity that frightened her, but Mrs. Fielding was 10 yards away, and the rules they had established must be maintained. So instead, she squeezed his hand and said, Then let us continue walking. The moors are beautiful today. In the evenings, they sat in the library while Adrian read aloud and Rosalie sketched. Not portraits this time, but small studies of hands, of light falling across stone, of the wild roses that grew outside the windows, creating for the simple joy of creation rather than commission. One evening, Adrian set down his book and watched her sketch for several moments in silence. May I ask you something personal? Rosalie glanced up, setting aside her charcoal. Of course. What would your father have thought of me? Of this situation? She considered carefully. My father believed that art revealed truth, and that truth, once revealed, demanded to be honored. He would have looked at your portrait and seen what I see. A man worth knowing, a man worth risking scandal to be near. Even though I can offer you nothing but uncertainty and potential ruin, Rosalie met his gaze directly. He would say that certainty is an illusion anyway, and that some things are worth the risk of ruin. Adrian leaned forward in his chair. I want to give you the world, Rosalie. Everything you deserve, but all I have to offer is a crumbling estate, a scandalous reputation, once word of our courtship spreads, and a heart that has been broken but is learning to beat again. Then you offer more than you know, she replied softly, because those things are real. They are honest. I do not want the world, Adrian. I simply want the truth of what we might build together. He reached across the space between their chairs, and she met him halfway, their fingers intertwining. The portrait hanging now in the great hall seemed to watch them with knowing eyes. 3 weeks into Rosalie's extended stay, an unexpected visitor arrived. The Duke of Ashworth, Lady Caroline's husband, and an old acquaintance of Adrian's from school days. His carriage appeared on a bright morning when Adrian and Rosalie were taking tea in the garden. Adrian's expression tightened at the announcement, but he rose to greet his guest with proper courtesy. "Your Grace, welcome to Thornfield. What brings you north?" "Business in York," the Duke replied. A jovial man with kind eyes and premature grey in his dark hair. "Thought I'd stop by and see how you're managing. Caroline sends her regards." He paused, noticing Rosalie. "And this must be the painter everyone in London is whispering about." Rosalie curtsied, feeling suddenly exposed. "Your Grace." The Duke studied her with interest, but no hostility. "They say you've painted a portrait that captures the real Adrian Hargrove. I confess I'm curious to see it. The man I knew at Cambridge kept himself so carefully controlled that I often wondered if there was any real emotion beneath the ice." Adrian's jaw tightened. "People change, Ashworth." "Indeed they do," the Duke agreed mildly. "And from what I hear, you've changed considerably in recent weeks. The entire town is buzzing with speculation about the mysterious Miss Bennet who has extended her stay at Thornfield well beyond any reasonable commission." Rosalie felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Your Grace, I assure you." "No need to explain," the Duke interrupted kindly. "I am not here to judge, but to congratulate." His smile was genuine. "Caroline and I have been very happy these past years. She was hurt when you broke the engagement, Adrian, but, in truth, we would have made each other miserable. What we had was arrangement, not affection." He looked between them. "What you two have, if the rumors are even half true, is something far rarer." Adrian relaxed slightly. "You are more generous than I deserve, Ashworth." "No," the Duke said. "I am simply honest. Life is too short for pretense. If you found someone who sees you clearly and loves you anyway, then damn the scandal and hold tight to that." After the Duke departed that afternoon, Adrian found Rosalie in the West Gallery where she had first painted his portrait. The easel still stood near the window, empty now but somehow still significant. "He was kind," Rosalie said without turning. "Your friend." "More than I expected," Adrian admitted, coming to stand beside her. "When I broke the engagement with Caroline, I lost many connections in society. Ashworth had every reason to be hostile. Instead, he offered blessing, perhaps because he has found his own happiness and wishes the same for others," Rosalie suggested. "It is easier to be generous when one's own life is full." Adrian turned to her, his expression serious. "Rosalie, we agreed to 1 month. That month ends in 3 days. I need to know. Have these weeks changed anything for you? Do you still believe this to be madness?" She faced him fully, her heart beating fast. "These weeks have shown me something I did not expect." His face fell. "That it was a mistake to stay." "No," she said quickly. "That it was a mistake to think 1 month could be enough. I thought distance and time would show me that what I felt was simply the intensity of those first weeks, the strangeness of the situation. But instead, every day has only deepened my certainty." "Certainty of what?" he asked, hope kindling in his eyes. "That I love you," she said simply. "Not the Earl of Thornfield, not the wounded man grieving his brother, but you, Adrian, the man who reads poetry aloud, who walks the moors at dawn, who has learned to laugh again, who holds his pain honestly instead of hiding it. You, exactly as you are." He closed his eyes briefly, as if her words were almost too much to bear. "Say it again." "I love you," she repeated. "And yes, it terrifies me, and yes, I know the scandal will be enormous, And yes, I understand that I may never be fully accepted by your world. But none of that changes the truth. I love you." Adrian opened his eyes, and she saw tears there, unashamed. "Then marry me," he said, for the second time. "Not in a month or a year, when scandal has died down. Now, immediately, before I lose my courage, or you regain your sense." Rosalie laughed, the sound breaking free like birds released from a cage. "That is possibly the worst proposal I have ever heard. But do you accept it?" he asked, reaching for her hands. She pretended to consider, an earl proposing marriage while openly weeping, offering me scandal and social ruin instead of security and comfort. What woman could resist such romance? "Rosalie," he growled, half laughing, half crying. "Yes or no?" "Yes," she said, and he pulled her into his arms so quickly she gasped. "Yes, Adrian, I will marry you. I will be your countess. I will face down every scandal-mongering gossip in London. I will paint you 1,000 more portraits and argue with you about everything and love you through it all." He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, 7 years of grief and loneliness and careful control burning away in the fire of finally allowing himself to feel, to want, to claim the happiness he had denied himself for so long. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Rosalie touched his face gently. "We are going to be the subject of every conversation in every drawing room in England. Let them talk," he said fiercely. "Let them say the Earl of Thornfield fell under the painter's spell. Let them whisper that I've gone mad with grief and thrown away my reputation. I don't care, Rosalie. I have been dead for 7 years. You brought me back to life. That is worth any scandal." Mrs. Fielding appeared in the doorway, took one look at them standing so close, tear-stained and glowing, and smiled. "Should I call for the vicar then?" Adrian laughed, the sound rich and full and utterly unlike the controlled man who had first hired Rosalie to paint his portrait. "Yes, Mrs. Fielding, call for the vicar. We're getting married." Within a fortnight, in the small chapel on the Thornfield estate, Adrian Hargrove, Earl of Thornfield, married Miss Rosalie Bennet before a handful of witnesses. The ceremony was simple, no grand London wedding, no society pageant, just two people who had found each other in the act of revelation, promising to continue that honest unfolding for the rest of their lives. Rosalie wore a gown of cream silk, simple but elegant, with wild roses from the moor woven through her hair. Adrian wore formal black, but his eyes held more light than she had ever seen. When the vicar pronounced them man and wife, Adrian kissed her with thorough tenderness, while Mrs. Fielding wept happy tears, and the few staff members present applauded. That night, as husband and wife, they stood together in the great hall before Adrian's portrait. The painted face looked down at them, capturing forever that moment of transformation. Grief acknowledged, hope awakening, the face of a man learning to live again. "You painted my soul," Adrian said quietly, his arm around Rosalie's waist, "and in doing so you saved it." "No," Rosalie corrected, leaning into his warmth. "I merely showed you what was always there. You saved yourself by having the courage to look." He turned her in his arms, his forehead resting against hers in that gesture that had become their private ritual. "What do we do now? When London hears of this marriage, the scandal will be unprecedented." "Now," Rosalie said with a smile, "we live fully, honestly, together. Let them say what they will. We know the truth." "And what is that truth?" "That sometimes the greatest masterpieces are not painted on canvas, but built in the quiet moments between two souls who dare to see each other truly." Adrian kissed her again, deep and sweet, in the shadow of the portrait that had brought them together. Outside, night settled over the Yorkshire moors. Inside Thornfield Manor, In corridors that had known only grief for 7 years, laughter returned at last. The portrait hanging in the great hall would become something of a legend in years to come. People travelled from London just to see it. The painting that supposedly bewitched an earl, the masterpiece that caused such scandal. But those who looked closely saw more than scandal. They saw truth, rendered in oil and brushstroke, the face of a man who had been lost and found himself again. The face of someone who chose love over propriety, life over mere existence, truth over comfortable lies. And if they looked very closely, they might notice something the artist had added in the final days before her wedding. Hidden in the shadows of the portrait, visible only to those who knew where to look, she had painted a single wild rose, a small signature of the love that had bloomed impossibly between painter and subject. Years later, when their children asked how their parents had met, Rosalie would smile and say, "I painted your father's portrait, and every brushstroke made him fall deeper into ruin." "What kind of ruin?" the children would ask. And Adrian would answer, holding his wife's hand, "The very best kind. The kind that destroys what you were so you can become what you were always meant to be." The portrait of the Earl of Thornfield remained in the Great Hall for generations. Other paintings came and went. Fashions changed. Seasons turned, but that one portrait stayed, a testament to the moment when grief learned to hope, when control learned to surrender, and when two hearts found each other in the radical act of being truly, completely seen. Some ruins, after all, are simply the breaking open of prisons we built around our own hearts, and some falls from grace are actually the first steps toward redemption. This is the story of a portrait that changed two lives, of a painter who saw beneath the surface, of an earl who finally allowed himself to be seen, of love that bloomed in the dangerous territory between should and could. If this story touched your heart, we would be honored if you would like this video and share it with someone who believes in love that transforms. Comment below and tell us which moment moved you most. Was it their first meeting in the mist-covered manor, the conversation about grief that changed everything? Or perhaps that moment when Adrian knelt before the portrait and finally saw himself truly? Subscribe to our channel for more Victorian romance tales that explore the quiet revolutions of the heart. Every week we bring you stories of courage, love, and transformation set in the grand estates and wild moors of England's most romantic era. Your subscription ensures you never miss another journey into the past, where passion and propriety danced their delicate dance. Stay until the very end for another tale of forbidden love and impossible choices. The next story will appear on your screen in moments. Thank you for joining us at Thornfield Manor. May you find the courage to paint your own truth, and may someone see it clearly and love you all the more.